Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis talking about the best and most interesting teams, players, and ideas in Northern college football. Good for us, Bill, because it's a very interesting season of Northern football. We're going to do something on this show that we have not yet done on Kings of the North, which is rank the best units. We've been doing Knights of the North. That's the best players in Northern football. And if you're new to the show, we've taken the 28 teams in the top half of the country in the Power Five, claim them as our own. We talk about them as a group, what they do well, talk about those teams in context of each other. We've talked about player rankings and team rankings. So we are going to do team rankings on this show, Bill. We're going to compare the best Northern teams in our rankings to the best Southern teams. We're also going to do unit rankings, offense, defense. No, you didn't do special teams, did you? You probably did.
No, I did consider it briefly, but I did not do that.
Yeah, I've been a little too on the nose for Bill Landis to be like, I really want to talk about Iowa State special teams. I'd be like, you're killing the show. You are. So I'm glad you pulled back on that. We're going to do that. We're going to do the look ahead at the end. We look at the best games coming up. Of course, we're going to do the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show. The story at Iowa continues to be very interesting. But of course, we start off with the Frantic 14, 5 topics in Northern football that we want to touch on quickly. Plus, at the end of that, we'll each plant our flag and have a take about Northern football. But we'll start first with this. Notre Dame karma. Bill Landis. I think Notre Dame, shorthand, maybe outplayed Ohio State and lost, and maybe got outplayed by Duke and won, and maybe in the scheme of the world and college football, they should be 1-1 in their last 2 games, so it all worked out.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought they were in a bad spot potentially going into that game. I had said on some of our other shows here on the podcast that I thought Notre Dame was going to lose to Duke, and for a while it certainly looked like they were going to. They pulled it out there with a pretty good late drive, big 4th down conversion from Sam Hartman. I do take issue with the way that Mike Elko and Duke decided to play that last drive against Notre Dame, because they just sort of stopped doing all the things that had been effective throughout the entirety of the game. But good win. Like I think a win that showed us a little something about Notre Dame. Like, even if they didn't play that well, finding a way to win after getting, beaten physically and mentally the week before by Ohio State, I think showed us something.
I think a huge win for Marcus Freeman. Last year, everybody made a big deal. They lose to Ohio State in the opener. Then they lose in week 2 to Marshall, right? Ohio State beat them twice. That didn't happen this time. They're in a stretch of 4 straight primetime games. Ohio State, Duke, Louisville this coming week, and then USC. If they had lost to Duke, now, Louisville's undefeated. We'll get to that at the end of the show on Look Ahead. Here comes Louisville, and USC's right around the corner. They could have been looking at a 4-game losing streak. And so and then all of a sudden, I think people would have been like, Marcus Freeman, is he the right guy? Can he keep a team on track? Is he a motivational leader? All those kind of things. I actually think this was a huge win for Notre Dame. Kyle McCord said he wanted to call the Ohio State win over Notre Dame the 3rd and 19 game. This is the 4th and 16 game. Sam Hartman had 5 runs for 6 yards before he ran 17 yards on 4th and 16 to keep the game alive. Sam Hartman, 15 of 30 in that game, but it was enough. He got it done on the last drive. I think potentially, I don't want to say program changing, but I think if Marcus Freeman has a good tenure at Notre Dame, they might look back on this one and say, man, that Duke game really kind of pointed us in the right direction. Too much or maybe yes?
No, they can exhale, I think. I think they were probably, a little on edge after that game because of all the things you said, probably worrying about how this could snowball on them. And it hasn't. So I actually think this is something that can probably I don't want to say turn their season around, because it wasn't going off the tracks, but something that can maybe give them a little bit of a springboard here.
All right. Topic 2, your guy, Neil Brown at West Virginia. West Virginia beat Pitt in a game where they had the exact same number of yards as Pitt, 211. So not an offensive slugfest there. The last 2 games against Texas Tech and TCU, West Virginia has been outgained in both those games. The last 3 games combined, West Virginia, their quarterbacks are 28 of 53 for 280 passing yards. That's in 3 games. They're averaging fewer than 100 passing yards per game, but guess what? They've won all 3 of those games. They're 4-1 overall. People didn't think West Virginia would win 4 games all year. Is Neil Brown a genius or just lucky? Either way, he's 4-1.
Yeah, he's probably lucky, but I think it's okay to be lucky when you're coaching for your job. we had a Neil Brown discussion, I think, after the backyard brawl. Like, did he save his job with that game? And I did not really embrace that idea. And I don't know that I'm fully embracing it here because, you know, they're not playing necessarily like a team that should be 4-1. So certainly this could get away from them. But if this continues on this trajectory, if they can get the bowl eligibility, which is just getting 2 more wins, I think Neil Brown is probably safe. You made the point earlier this year that should not be the threshold necessarily for West Virginia football. They have been better than that. They have been conference champions. I think it is realistic to want to be a conference champion, especially in the new iteration of the Big 12, and they're not there. But are you going to fire a coach if he wins 6-7 games? I don't know if they're quite in that position either. So if you look at the rest of their schedule, I think you can convince yourself they're capable of winning all but one of their remaining games, and that's at Oklahoma later in the year. I think they could win the rest of them. I don't think they're going to because they're not good enough on offense, but their defense is pretty good. They blocked 2 field goals in that game against TCU to help them win, and their defense is like really good on third down and really good in the red zone, and it is carrying them at the moment.
And what nobody around West Virginia is doing is complaining about how they're winning. Oh, you know, we got outgained by Texas Tech. They're taking the wins, baby. 4-1. Nice job by West Virginia. Number 3, twofold on Indiana, because this was an interesting Indiana-Maryland game that had consequences. Maryland thumped Indiana. 2 things for you. One is you've been on the Walt Bell Indiana offensive coordinator kind of question mark bandwagon all season. He got fired. Number 2, I think you've said on the show that Indiana has a good defense. Would you like to rescind that?
No, I don't know that I want to rescind it. I don't think they're like the 85 Bears, right? But if you look at the way that game played out, it was 21-3 after the first quarter, and Maryland had 2 drives that started inside the Indiana 30-yard line. Like, it's hard to play defense when that happens. So it still got away from them, right? Like, Maryland, I think, still averaged better than 8 yards per play. But the state of that game just, like, totally got away from Indiana. So I'm not looking at that necessarily as a reflection of who Indiana is as a defense. Like, are they tremendous? Probably not. I'm probably a little too strong in that. Do I think they're bad? No, not yet, but maybe they will be, and prove me wrong. I think it's much more about Indiana having anemic offense and putting its defense in terrible position to succeed against a Maryland offense that obviously can hurt a lot of teams.
This is what happens, though. You have a head coach who leans one side of the ball, and then you're like, well, the other guy's not getting it done. So defensive head coach Tom Allen fires the offensive coordinator. Tom Allen, his first 4 seasons was 24-21. His last 3 years, he's now 8-21. If they fire him after this season, they owe him $20 million. If they give him 1 more year in 2024, then fire him, they only owe him $8 million. But when you start firing coordinators, is that a sign of what's to come? Or was this like, hey, we legitimately have to fire the guy who sort of didn't tell us we were going to run the option against Ohio State in the opener and hasn't done anything else offensively since?
I mean, they were terrible last year too. Like, Tom Allen shouldn't have brought Walt Bell in the first place. Certainly should not have brought him back after last year. Tom Allen is going to get fired, but it probably won't be after this year because I don't know that Indiana is a program that's going to pay $20 million to do something like that.
All right, let's move on to number 4. This was another game that happened this weekend that I think told us some things about a couple Big Ten programs, and that was Purdue beating up Illinois. So Illinois, they couldn't protect. They had drops. Luke Altmaier missed throws. They've kind of been owned by Kansas, Penn State, and now Purdue. Brett Bielema in year 1 was 5-7. Last year, he was 8-5. It felt like they were ascending. They're now 2-3. They're 0-2 in the Big Ten. This wasn't good. And Illinois, to go get owned by Ryan Walters, the guy who ran the Illinois defense last year, which was so good, it got him the Purdue job. This is a 16-13 game at halftime. Purdue outscores Illinois 28-3 in the second half. And in the post-game news conference, Brett Bielema is using words like embarrassed, applying it to himself, to his staff, to his team. Are we wondering about Illinois after this one?
I mean, wondering about them certainly for this year. I don't know that I'd be, dumping all my Brett Bielema stock because they're going to have one bad year. Like, you have to be able to replace guys like Ryan Walters when they leave. Did Brett Bielema do the best job of that? I think we'll see. The early returns are not great, and they also were wrong about the quarterback they picked in the transfer portal too, and their offense is not very good. So that's the world you live in when you decide you don't want to recruit and develop quarterbacks and want to go shopping for SEC castoffs. I don't think that's a good way of doing business. A lot of Big Ten teams, I think, are getting hurt right now because they didn't pick good transfer quarterbacks. Illinois is not alone in that, but maybe a philosophical change there is necessary. And I guess time will tell whether or not Brett Bielema made the right decision in replacing Ryan Walters. But it's going to be a downer of a year, I think. Do I feel lower on the trajectory of the program? I wouldn't go quite that far just yet.
It is interesting about the transfer quarterbacks. You really kind of are living or dying. You can do almost everything else right or wrong, and a good transfer quarterback can bail you out, and the wrong transfer quarterback can kind of torpedo you. And as you said, we're seeing that. By the way, Illinois, 9 penalties for 83 yards in that game. Purdue, 3 penalties for 15 yards. I don't think Brett Bielema likes that either. All right, number 5. This is mostly for me because I told everybody that Syracuse was going to beat Clemson, and they didn't. And so now I'm mad at Syracuse. This is this is a rise up moment, and they didn't rise up. Garrett Schrader, their quarterback, who we've praised so much, fumbled on their first series when they were moving the ball. They had a bad, careless pitch that led to another fumble that set up Clemson for a short field. 2 fumbles and an interception for Syracuse. All of them led to touchdown drives for Clemson, and they tried a ridiculous field goal at the end of the first half. They tried a 57-yard field goal that missed and set up Clemson for another touchdown drive. So I thought Clemson was really average. Mm-hmm. Syracuse is still 4-1. They have North Carolina and Florida State both on the road the next 2 weeks. And then after that, 5 very winnable games. This is probably an 8 or 9 win season for Syracuse. So I'm not actually mad. I'm just disappointed. I thought this was an opportunity and they didn't take it.
Yeah, well, it's a bummer, right? Because I like Clemson did not play well, and Clemson is not impressive on offense. Clemson's defense, I think, has a little something to it, but that is an average offense at best, and they played like it against Syracuse. I actually thought Syracuse defense played pretty well considering some of the positions that it was put in. You can't make the mistakes that Syracuse made, and also like their offense doesn't have a whole lot going for it, I don't think, unless Garrett Schrader's running for like 150 yards. They're missing some receivers. They're missing their tight end, who's one of the better tight ends in the country. So they have a small margin for error anyway. So you can't do what they did there against Clemson. But I do like it's on the table for them to beat UNC, right? Like it wouldn't shock the world if they beat UNC. Like I don't think they're going to beat Florida State, but if that's the only other ACC game they lose, in an ACC that has scrapped divisions for its conference championship game, like, I don't know. I kind of feel like Syracuse is still on the hunt.
They took a lot of one-on-one shots down the sideline and just missed them. It's like, I get it. You get single coverage, you take a shot. But, man, like if you're not hitting any of them. And then Dino Babers afterwards, it was like, hey, why did you try a 57-yard field goal to set up Clemson on a short field? He was like, hey, that guy's going to have the school record. He can't have the school record unless you take a risk and give him a chance to make the school record. And it was sort of like, what are you talking about?
That's terrible motivation.
Why is that? What? He was like, you can't, it was one of those things. It's like, you can't ever kick a 61-yard field goal if you don't try a 61-yard field goal. And it was like, you're playing Clemson in a 1-score game, right? What? This is not a MAC team in mid-September where you're dorking around. So it was to not take advantage of the opportunity. And again, I was like watching that game and following people on Twitter, and people like, well, here comes the Clemson knockout punch. And I was like, you must not be watching because Clemson is not playing well at all. They didn't do anything in rhythm offensively. Their entire offense was Cade Klubnik off platform. But then on the other side, Syracuse couldn't protect at all, like against that Clemson defensive line, which is sometimes when you have underdog roster versus, a more talented roster, that's what happens.
Clemson's touchdown drives were 55 yards, 3 yards, 61 yards, and 32 yards. They were the benefactor of excellent field position in that game.
All right, plant your flag. I'm planting mine right in Athens. Man, Georgia should have lost to Auburn. I can't. Please stop. Stop with the Georgia. Stop it. It's not the same. Last week on this show, I said I would have had them 7th on my AP ballot. They lost some number 1 votes, but they're still number 1. Auburn almost beat Georgia. They threw for 88 yards. They ran for 219, but 125 of their 219 were by the quarterbacks. Peyton Thorne, ex-Michigan State quarterback, ripped up Georgia with the run game, had a 61-yard like QB power around the edge on an opening drive. Brock Bowers absolutely saves them. He had 14 targets in that game. The rest of the team for Georgia had 18. He had 8 catches for 157, completely bails them out. Carson Beck, I like the big time throw metric on PFF. Like, hey, what is a big time throw? You know it when you see it. He had none in that game because because Brock Bowers was so wide open at the end because Auburn couldn't cover him. He had none. He has 3 the whole year. Just by comparison, last year, CJ Stroud had 29 for the year. Stetson Bennett had 28. Carson Beck has 3 in 5 games. Georgia is not that good. Auburn can't throw it, and they can't defend, and they should have beaten Georgia. So I just want people of the North to know that, Landis. Shouldn't they know that?
They should know that. I would hope that I hope they watched that and enjoyed watching Georgia look like it wants to lose, because it's fun.
It's one of those things, because if you look at your team and you think, oh, Penn State struggled with Northwestern and Washington only won by a score and Ohio State was lucky to escape Notre Dame and Notre Dame was lucky to escape Duke. It's like, have you seen Georgia? I just want people to understand it's happening elsewhere too. So I'm planting my flag on Georgia is not as good as anybody thinks. Where are you planting your flag?
I think, and there's probably a fairly strong counter argument to this, maybe with one quarterback in particular, but I think at the moment that Cam Rising, the Utah quarterback, is the most important player in Northern football, because without him, Utah is like basically Iowa. I think I sent that to you via Slack during the UCLA game. The Utah is Iowa, and they're a more effective version of it, but it's no way to live. Utah is a team that is capable of competing for its conference title if it gets its quarterback back. And he has been cleared for the last couple of weeks, just on the sideline and street clothes. They are off this week, and I guess some of the thought was that they'll bring him back after this week off and have him for the backstretch of the season. It'll just be a shame if they don't, because that defense is incredible. I think that's a championship level defense. They lost to Oregon State this week and only gave up 3 touchdowns. I thought they played very well on the defensive side of the ball. Still shorthanded. Still lost. They lost a key defender in that game, and Logan Fano, one of their defensive ends, hurt his knee, and they still played really well. They just got nothing going on offense right now without Cam Rising, without Brant Kuithe, their tight end, who's probably like a second-round NFL draft pick kind of guy. But it's more about Cam Rising, because I think it's not just his talent. I think it's the confidence that he gives the rest of the offense, and your trust in him being able to make big plays for you when you need it. Because they're a team that's going to have to win like 28, 21, 35, 28 most weeks anyway. They're just not capable of getting to that number on offense right now without Cam Rising.
And it showed up when they finally played like a really good team like Oregon State. They had gotten by against everybody else because that defense is so good. But this was kind of the point, like, okay, this is not sustainable with as many good teams as they're going to play in the Pac-12 unless they get him back. All right. That's the Frantic 14. When we come back, we're ranking the best teams in the North, but what we're really doing is talking about how many teams we really think can win the national title. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis back on Kings of the North. Thanks to you guys for joining us here, whether it's on YouTube or on our podcast feed. We know a lot of you guys are listening to us for Ohio State coverage, and we certainly appreciate that. We do our Kings of Columbus every Wednesday, which is focused on Ohio State. But then, hey, maybe you're not an Ohio State fan. Maybe you like somebody else on the North and you're finding us. And if that's you, then thanks for giving us a try. Michigan, Penn State, Washington, Oregon, Notre Dame fans. All right, we're going to rank the best teams both in the North and in the South. Landis sent me his ballot. I combined it with my ballot. In the North, we rank everybody who's worth ranking. And I want to just read our rankings list, Landis. We do this every week. There's not a lot of change right now. But I want to talk about the field, the national title field right now compared to years past, both North and South. Let's get to our Northern rankings. Number 1, Washington. Number 2, Michigan. Number 3, Ohio State. Number 4, Penn State. Number 5, Washington State. Number 6, Oregon. Number 7, Notre Dame. Number 8, Oregon State. Number 9, Utah. The Oregon State win over Utah is the thing that changed things the most in there. You did move up Michigan on your ballot, which allowed Michigan to be number 2 overall. And now let me do our Southern rankings. This is like everybody else. So we have our 28 Northern teams that we do. There's 69 teams in the Power 5. So this is from the other 41. Florida State 1, Texas 2, Georgia 3. Good for us. USC 4, Bama 5, Oklahoma 6. Here's my point, Landis. Well, before we get to the point, what made you move Michigan up a little bit on your ballot this week? Because you were a little more down on them last week.
So what I ended up doing was just kind of flipping Penn State and Michigan. Last week I had Washington, Ohio State, Penn State, Washington State, and Michigan. Everything else stayed the same for me. I just now have Michigan third and Penn State fifth. That was like the Michigan I think I've been waiting to see against Nebraska. Their defense has been excellent all year, and we'll talk about that when we do these position group rankings here in a few minutes. That looked like the offense that I want to see from Michigan, more or less. Like JJ McCarthy was not spraying it all over the field. I think he only threw like 16 passes. And if you look at their total rushing numbers from that game, like the average is not great, but before they pulled their starters, which I think happened after they went up 35-0 in the third quarter, they were averaging right around 6 yards a carry, which I think they can still be better than that. But I thought that was the best their run game looked. It was a lopsided win on the road against, albeit not a great Nebraska team. And the defense continued to look awesome. Whereas now, like I have some questions about Penn State, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. I think their defense is awesome too, but just a few more question marks in my mind with Penn State than Michigan right now.
Okay. Goofy game for Penn State at Northwestern. Close in the first half, blew out Northwestern in the second half. Penn State, fumbled the opening kickoff, kind of had some weird stuff, but I do think there are some legitimate, at least curiosities about the Penn State offense when it comes to man, they really are grinding it out in a very big way, which allows a much smaller margin for error. And then if we're really trying to look at both sides of the ball, I think that stands out in that conversation. So I think these rankings this week feel about right to me on both sides. And so let me ask you this question overall. I looked at the national title odds at this time last year after 5 weeks of the season, and then I looked at them this year. A year ago, here were the national title odds after 5 weeks. Ohio State and Georgia were both plus 200 or 2-1 to win the national title, and Alabama was plus 250 or 2.5 to 1. 3 overwhelming favorites to win the national title. Clemson was 11-1, USC was 16-1, and Michigan at this point was 20-1, for example. So that was 5 teams who had odds of 16-1 or better to win the national title, but 3 odds-on teams. Here are the odds this year. Right now, Georgia is plus 300, 3-1. Michigan is 4-1. Ohio State and Texas are both plus 750 or 7.5 to 1. Florida State is 9-1. Penn State is 14-1. Oregon and Washington are both 16-1, and USC is 18-1. So my point is this. Last year, there were 5 teams, 16-1 or better right now. This year, there are 9. Actually, there are 5 teams last year that were 18-1 or better, right?
Mm-hmm.
This year, there's 9. So there's more in the mix there. And last year, there were 3 teams that were more overwhelming favorites than the favorite right now. Right. So Georgia, Ohio State, 2-1, Bama, 2.5 to 1. That was heavier than Georgia at 3-1 right now. As we talk North and South, how would you characterize the national title field this year compared to last year? Does it feel much larger to you in terms of teams that you think can actually win it? Or is there not that much of a difference?
No, it feels much more wide open this year. It feels about as wide open, I think, as it's felt in the playoff era. It's hard to say. Like at this point in the season, it's hard to draw that from memory. But I feel pretty confident saying that. And a lot can change, right? We're only through 5 weeks of the season, but at the moment, I don't know that I agree that I think all 9 of those teams you mentioned can win, but I think probably at least 7 or 8 of them I think are serious contenders, and that feels very much different. And also too, the pool of northern teams is deeper than I think it ever has been. And of teams you think, look at the teams in the north and think like you can realistically win a national championship. Most years it's just Ohio State. This year, not only is Ohio State not alone in that argument, I don't even know if they're at the top of the list, but they're still in the argument, which is I think a pretty drastic change.
So a year ago, teams that were 18-1 or better odds to win the national title at this point, it was 4 in the South and 1 in the North. This year, it's still 4 in the South, but it's 5 in the North. That's where the change is, right? There's many more teams in the North that can do it. So let's play a game. Let's play. Does Landis think this team then can win the national title?
Mm-hmm.
Georgia.
Yes, only because
I love the hesitation.
Well, their schedule's so weak. Like
the hesitation was music to my ears. Thank you for hesitating.
They're not playing like one. They're not playing like a team that looks capable at the moment. Now, they're immensely talented and I think are capable of flipping that switch at any point. So I want to, I guess, pay proper respect to that. But it's mostly their schedule, which is atrocious. Like, I don't look at who they play the rest of the year. Who do you think could even potentially beat them? Maybe Missouri. Like, I think Missouri is carrying the hopes and dreams of a lot of people now for the remainder of this season.
I don't even know if I agree with immensely talented. They are a one-person offense. Brock Bowers bailed them out. The team that they reminded me of, watching them beat Auburn, was 2016 Ohio State with Curtis Samuel, where Curtis Samuel was the entire offense because they had to play. Brock Bowers had 18 targets. They also had to play on 3rd and 2 where they lined him up as the fullback and handed the ball to him. I was like, oh, maybe Ohio State should do that with Marvin Harrison Jr. Just line him up at H-back and hand him the ball between the tackles. What are we doing? There's nobody else on that offense that scares you, including the quarterback, Carson Beck, who was fine. And then, yes, that defense has a bunch of guys who run to the ball, but they were giving some stuff up, man. I don't know what to tell you. They were giving some stuff up against an offense that has nothing. Auburn is not good. Auburn was anemic offensively against Texas A&M. They've had multiple games this year where they've done nothing, and they were taking it to the vaunted Georgia defense. So just the hesitation was enough for me. If they had a real schedule, I think we'd be finding out some real stuff about Georgia. We're just not going to find out. So we'll agree, yes. Michigan.
Can I ask you a question before we move to Michigan?
Yeah.
Because like we have our teams this year. It is an evolving thing. If Missouri, who's like right on the line geographically, if Missouri beats Georgia and ends, I think Georgia's chances of getting in there, and then probably maybe not eliminates, but makes it difficult, I think, for the SEC in general to get into the playoff. Do we welcome them into our northern enclave here? I
got to tell you, and Louisville, who's another border team for us, 5-0.
Yeah.
Right. Going to this Notre Dame game. Like if you're right on the edge, we'll take you if you're good. Congratulations, Missouri. You're winning for entry into the North. Hey, what's on the line in this game for the Tigers? Well, if they win, they get to be in the North. Good luck to you guys, Missouri. All right. Georgia is, and then we'll kick teams out of the North if they're not good. It'd be like Iowa State. You're in the South now. Georgia is a yes. Is Michigan at 4-1? Can they win the national title?
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course they can. Can Ohio State win the national title?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so too. Can Texas?
No, I don't. I'm not there. I don't think I'm there.
I don't exactly know what it looks like of them winning 2 games in the playoff.
Yeah,
like discipline, down to down, both sides of the ball, plays when you need it. I'm on the edge with them. Florida State, can they win it?
Yeah.
Penn State, can they win it?
I don't know that they have enough offensively. I think I would say no.
I wonder if that's like a version of Georgia 2 years ago, right? The 2021 Georgia, awesome defense and just enough offensively on the border. Oregon, can they win it?
I feel like I know nothing about Oregon still, but they are unbeaten and are winning lopsided. I'll say yes, but it is not a confident yes.
They have a particular way of getting after you offensively, and I think their defense is okay. So I'll say yes. Washington, can they win it?
Yeah.
I don't know why Washington is 16-1. It seems odd to me.
Seems like good value.
16-1. I don't know. I don't know what's holding them back. I don't. As we've talked, they're sort of like what Oklahoma had been in the playoff, but their defense is better than Oklahoma's ever was back then.
I would think so, yeah.
USC with their terrible defense, a terrible Alex Grinch, Lincoln Riley defense. Can USC win the national title?
No, not with that defense. No,
I have real questions about that too. Is there anybody else? Do you want to throw in Bama? Can Bama win the national title?
Yes.
Are you afraid of Bama? I didn't like that pause. Why are you afraid? Because they beat Mississippi State?
Oh, because
the SEC stinks.
Their defense looks really good, and I I would put them in a similar category to Penn State. I think they probably don't have enough offense ultimately to do it, but we've seen Nick Saban do it with terrible offense before. And I think this defense is rounding into form in a way that would make me not want to have to play them.
No. All the Bama love is based off beating bad SEC teams. And I finally worked it out. I workshopped it a little bit I was on the Ralph Russo podcast last week, and it's things I've been saying here, but I'm officially, I think, decided I'm going to call the SEC the Meh-CC for the rest of the year. Get it?
I like that. Yeah, we actually somebody sent us in a text, and they said, "Is it the Meh-EC or the Mess-EC?"
Oh, that's good. Oh, I didn't even. Well, thanks for sending that text. I think it's Meh, but you still the S slides into it, but it's not mess. It's Meh-CC. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, that was Trent, by the way, who sent that in. Thank you for that.
Thank you for the suggestion, Trent. So yeah, I think people, they started Tyler Buchner in a game like this last game. Tyler Buchner was 4th in the quarterback rotation. He wasn't even 3rd anymore. Like I don't think they know what they're doing at quarterback. And just because Jalen Milroe was 10 of 12 in the last game against Mississippi State, and it's like, oh well, get the little quarterback. They don't know what they're doing on offense still, in a way that's going to show up when they play anybody real. I think I just don't know when they're going to play anybody real because their division is not good.
Right. Yeah. They had 2 tackles for loss against Texas. They have 28 in their last 3 games since then. Dallas Turner looks like the guy everyone thought Dallas Turner was. Yeah. I don't know. I think you're right on their offense, and I do ultimately think that is something that will keep them from reaching a championship ceiling. But man, that defense looks really good.
Oklahoma? Do you want to throw Oklahoma in?
No, because they did. I don't think they looked great against Cincinnati, and they did pull away from Iowa State, but that was looking a little weird early too. I don't think they're quite on that level.
Notre Dame, revived Notre Dame. No, yes.
I don't think they have the offense for it. No.
I'll give you the last team then that I actually do want to throw in the mix for real, and they're 200-1 to win the national title. It's Oregon State. I think Oregon State has an actual path to the Pac-12 championship. They lost a shootout with Washington State. They just got a win over Utah. They don't play USC in the regular season. And if they win the Pac-12 with 1 loss, they'll get in the playoff. Mm-hmm. And then I think they're solid. I think they remind me a little bit of Michigan. Like they kind of control the ball, yet they can be explosive with Damian Martinez. DJ Uiagalelei, I think, is a quarterback who can get them there. Their offensive line is good. I think their defense is good enough. I think they're well coached. And to me, if TCU can get to the national title game last year, I think Oregon State can get there this year, but I think Oregon State would be more ready for it. So for 200-1, I think they at least belong on the edge of the conversation because I think the path is actually there.
Yeah, I still believe what I said last week about their ability to hang with teams that can throw it the way that Washington can when they see them later in the year. I don't think Oregon State's secondary is tremendous. They put Aiden Childs in that game against Utah, their backup quarterback for a drive, and that was enough of do you guys really believe in DJ to get you there? I don't know. He only played 1 drive. But even messing around in that way, I think is a little odd at this stage of the game. So I have a hard time embracing DJ as the guy that can get them there too. But I guess I would say this, their path to winning the Pac-12, I don't love. I do think they're capable of it. And if they do, and if they get into the playoff, I do think they're a team that you probably don't want to play in the playoff because they're physical. They're going to give you one of the better swings I think that you'll get all year if you end up playing them on a stage like that. And I do think if the game breaks a particular way, they're hard to beat. So those odds feel large or not in their favor, or more not in their favor than they should be. But I don't know that I embrace them as a national title contender. But if we're going to talk about USC in that way, we should probably put Oregon State on that level too.
Yeah, the idea that Oregon State's 200-1 and USC is 18-1 just is not right.
Yeah,
and I do think it shows up. For instance, a team like Syracuse just couldn't protect against a team like Clemson. I think Oregon State in games like that can protect. And I think that's a huge thing because sometimes it's you have a little bit on defense, you have some playmakers, but if you can't run your offense because you can't block anybody, you're dead. And I think Oregon State against the best teams will be able to do that. So in the end, that's Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, Oregon, Washington. That's 6. USC and Penn State and Texas were a little iffy on. We're maybe trying to get Bama and Oregon State in that conversation. We're somewhere around 8 to 10 real national title contenders, where I think a year ago, Landis, if I would have said who can really win it, would we have gone any beyond Georgia, Bama, Ohio State? Would we have believed in Michigan a year ago? Would we have believed in Clemson or USC and everybody else, or would it have been a list of 3?
I don't think we would have believed in Michigan to this extent by this point last year. There probably would have been a little bit of USC talk out there, maybe, but it would have been misguided. But yeah, I think it would have been a 3-team race.
All right. It's more like an 8-team race. Kind of fun. When we come back, we're going to decide which units might decide that race. This is the best offenses and defenses in the North. It's not a list, it's a draft, and it's next on Kings of the North. Time to draft the best units in the North. No special teams units. We're doing offense and defense. So this is 56 units up for grabs for our 28 teams. And we're going to do it as a draft because that makes us fight. You want to pick first? You want me to pick first?
I'll pick first because I think there's interesting discussion to be had after the first pick, which of course is the Washington offense.
Yes.
Yeah. And where we go from here, I think it'll be fun. But they are deadly. And what was I think actually kind of exciting about what happened this past week was Arizona was just like not going to get beat by Washington throwing the ball over their heads. And Michael Penix still threw for a bunch of yards, but he didn't throw any touchdown passes. They ended up rushing for 4 touchdowns in that game. They still scored in the first 3 possessions. They still moved it pretty well. They probably should have had more like 42 or 49 points in that game. To make it a little more lopsided than it ended up being. But I liked that a team sort of made Washington at least finish off drives by running the football, and they were able to do it. Because that was a question I had in my mind about that offense was when a team did that, can you find another way to win? And they did find another way to win. And like, of course, I don't worry about their ability to throw the ball against anybody. So yeah, they're deadly and apparently versatile now too.
And that game looked close. Maybe it wasn't really close. Arizona scored in the last 70 seconds to make it a 1-score game. And then if they recover the onside kick, they have a chance to tie. They didn't recover the onside kick. Washington did take everything that was in front of them. They had a fumble at the 5-yard line. It showed up a little bit. They handed off to a receiver. They started using a receiver as as like a running back, and he fumbled. It's like, okay, well, don't use a receiver as a running back. Their starting running back was lost for the season.
Yeah.
Before the year started. So like that's showing up a little bit, but I even sent you a play. They ran a couple counter plays on the goal at the 5-yard line in the run game that just really worked. The thing that I like, they are first in the nation in plays of both 20 yards and 30 yards from scrimmage. So they're the most explosive. They are 7th in the Power 5 in red zone touchdown rate, which is when you get inside the 20, how often do you score touchdowns? I like that they're both of those things because there's a team we're going to talk about later that's explosive that is not good in the red zone when it comes to scoring touchdowns. And I was waiting for that to be a thing that shows up with Washington, and it doesn't. By the way, last 2 games did not play with Jalen McMillan, their second best receiver, one of the best receivers in the nation. So it's all Rome Odunze and then some other guys behind him, but McMillan's out. He'll be back. So they haven't quite been themselves, but I think it was a good test to play that way and still win that way. And if you got tricked into like, oh, I don't know, Washington's vulnerable, they're not. They showed they can win even when you take away the deep ball. Arizona's playing 7 DBs that whole game, right? Yeah. So it was a good play by Arizona, but it still didn't work.
Right. And this is like Washington offense conversation. I guess I will say, to play a little devil's advocate, like Arizona played without Jaden DeLaura and Michael Wiley, their starting quarterback and their best running back in that game. And like, it was still close, which is not tremendous. So if you still have questions about Washington's defense, I think they're fair. But I have no questions about their offense, and that is the best unit in the North.
But like both Washington and Georgia played 1-score games. They were not at all the same.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
Right. Like Georgia actually almost lost and maybe should have lost. Right.
Yeah.
Washington was not close to losing. They should have won by 3 scores and they won by 1. Yeah. So if you're just scoreboard watching, I want people to understand that I actually think it was a good test. They're the obvious number 1. I'll take the Penn State defense number 2. Penn State's defense, they are 3rd in the nation in points allowed. 9.6 points per game. Only Michigan and Ohio State are better. They're allowing the fewest yards per game. And I just ran through the PFF numbers to check like our northern defenses. How many pressures a game are people getting? They're getting like 26 pressures a game in a world where everybody else gets like 15 or 17. So they are getting after the quarterback, I think, in a way above and beyond any other defense that we're going to talk about. And I think it's all real. I think it's all real. Defensive line, linebackers, secondary. We've talked about that before. And to me, this is a top tier. I would lump the Penn State defense in with the Washington offense on. They're the best of what they do in the North, and they're a clear top two for me. Were they a clear top two for you?
They were, yes. I would have taken Penn State's defense second had I had the second pick. I agree with everything you said. They generate havoc. They keep teams out of the end zone. They're like pretty terrifying. Like if you think of some of the like really good SEC style of defenses that just like flew all over the place, and just really made it difficult to not only move the ball but like keep the ball. That's what Penn State's doing right now, and it's really impressive.
Okay. I'm sure we're going to disagree now. So who you taking third?
Michigan's defense.
Michigan's defense. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Now, the schedule they've played plays into this, right? They have not really played a good offensive team yet, but they have smothered every team that they've played on defense. They've given up 3 touchdowns this year. And unfortunately, the efficiency numbers were not updated prior to us recording this. So these are still from last week, but they gave up 1 touchdown to Nebraska. So I'm sure they're still more or less the same for Michigan's defense. First in drive efficiency, second in points per drive, first in available yards, first in touchdown rate, first in first down rate.
6 points per game, best in the country. Second in yards allowed behind only Penn State. And again, I think it's a 3-level defense. They haven't been tested, which is the thing that holds you back a little bit. And I think when you get into some of the more like super opponent adjusted kind of stuff, I think they fall down a little bit in some areas because they haven't played a defense that's really going to test them. I had the Michigan defense 7th, but I don't think there's a huge gap between my 3 and 10. I think there was a clear top 2. So number 4, I'm going to take the Michigan offense. And this is where I wonder how much we disagree on this. Where did you have the Michigan offense on your list?
I actually had them next. I had them 4th.
Oh, I thought we were going to have a big fight about the Michigan offense.
No.
Because I do think what the Michigan offense is doing, talk about smothering. They're smothering people on offense as well. This is what I like. I'm going to compare the Michigan offense to the Penn State offense. Okay, the Penn State offense. Penn State is first in the nation in time of possession. Okay, Michigan is 9th in the Power 5 in time of possession. So Penn State's first in the Power 5, Michigan's 9th. But when you look at explosive plays of 20 yards or more this season, Penn State has 12, Michigan has 25. Okay, so I do think if you are looking at scores and watching Michigan score 31, 31, 34, this was the first time they got into the 40s this week against Nebraska, and thinking like, I don't know, how good is their offense? They are smothering people. They are punting twice a game, which is tied for the fewest in the nation with Miami and LSU. I like when you don't punt. They are controlling the ball. These are their drives against Nebraska. Should I read them all? They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drives of more than 5 minutes, which is my main point. They only had 8 drives the whole game. 6 touchdown drives, a field goal, and a punt. And when they play a team, if they played Washington or Ohio State or Oregon, they would hold onto the ball, I think, and frustrate the heck out of those other teams because they are efficient and dangerous, but they are very comfortable playing at their pace. And with as much as coaches like Ryan Day have talked about fewer plays and fewer possessions this year, I think that can be even more of an advantage. So I think if you think they are grinding it out and that's all they are, you're wrong. I think they are very good. It is a stylistic choice that I actually think might pay off for them when it gets to the biggest games of the year, because they are going to slow some people down while still being very good on offense.
Grinding teams into the ground, I think, is fine. It's like if Army scored every time it had the ball, people would think
Yeah.
of that style of play much differently. And I think that's what Michigan is doing. And I think it's where I've come around a little bit too, is I think I was thinking too much about pace of play and not enough about efficiency. I do still wonder. I think to win a national championship, you got to be explosive, and I do wonder about that ceiling for them, especially in a world where if like they need to be explosive via JJ McCarthy, like standing in the pocket and picking apart a defense as opposed to doing it off play action or broken plays. That is still a question mark for me, but they've been plenty efficient so far throwing the ball. That one game where JJ had 3 boneheaded picks aside, like they've been very good throwing it. Roman Wilson looks great. He looks like a big play receiver. I do think their offensive line is running into form, or rounding into form, excuse me. They did seem to find another gear running the football against Nebraska, as I mentioned earlier. So it feels like they're building, which I think if you want to embrace offense or defense in this kind of discussion, you want to see them building towards something, and I do think Michigan's doing that.
4th in the Power 5 in third down conversion rate, also 56.6, which is if you're going to grind it out and control the ball, you got to convert on third down, and they're clearly doing that. All right, who do you have 5th?
I'm going to take Utah's defense 5th.
That's also who I had next.
So, like, I think there's a conversation there with like Ohio State's defense, maybe, but if you look at like havoc and success rate, Utah's a little better. Ohio State's better scoring. Like they give up about a field goal less per game than Utah has given up, but Utah's scoring defense is plenty good. And I just think you feel them more than you would feel like an Ohio State defense. Like they're making more impact plays at and behind the line of scrimmage. I think they're probably a more physical defense. And actually Utah's defense might be the most physical defense in the North, perhaps even more physical than Penn State's. Penn State, I just think, has more dudes. But Utah is really good. It's a shame that right at the moment that their offense is trying to figure out things and dealing with so many key injuries, because if they weren't, I think we'd be talking about Utah in a very different light based on how good that defense is.
Yeah, and it's again the conversation like you have with the Iowa defense. Sometimes the totality of the team leaks in to how you view one side of the ball. And so I do think, again, the efficiency rating going into this week, Utah was first in the FEI rating. So I agree with everything you said, and I'll take the Ohio State defense next.
Yep.
But I had Utah ahead of Ohio State because I do think they're a little more dangerous getting after the passer. I really think Ohio State secondary has played well. Obviously, Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers at linebacker are really good. Ohio State is second in the nation in points allowed at 8.5 per game. They're 4th in the Power 5 in yards allowed per game. So I do think the performance against Notre Dame is impressive. Now, Notre Dame didn't score much against Duke either. So again, Notre Dame's not Washington when it comes to offense, but that was a big game where the defense showed up for Ohio State and put the offense in position to go win that game. So you hold a team like Notre Dame at home to 14. That's a big nod for the defense. I think they're very good, but I do think they're a cut below the top tier of defenses we're talking about, just because I don't think they scare you quite as much, because as we've talked about, Jim Knowles is willingly playing more of a bend don't break defense this season. That's working.
They are a more extreme version of bend but don't break than I realized. Like if you look at their first down rate, they are allowing at least one first down on 74% of opponent drives, which is significantly worse than they were last year. But they're also only allowing a touchdown on 11% of drives. And if you looked at those, if you took those numbers out of this year and put them into last year, they would have been like the best defense in the country in touchdown rate and like the 125th defense in first down rate. It's very odd. It is certainly contributing, I think, to the lower number we've seen from Ohio State's offense, because I do think teams are holding on to the ball a little bit against Ohio State, but they're not scoring, which I think is really, really all that matters. Ohio State's still pretty good on stop rate. They're just a little different about getting there than they were last year.
So I had Ohio State 5th overall on my list for their defense. Where did you have Ohio State?
I had them. I would have picked them here. I had them 6th.
Okay. All right. So who are you going to take? So I took them 6th there. Who are you taking 7?
I'm pretty torn here, if I'm being honest, on what to do. And part of it is like, if you look at numbers, like you should probably take Oregon's offense. I don't love Oregon's offense. I kind of want to take Washington State's offense.
Those are the next two that I have on my list.
I think I'm going to take Washington State's offense. I just like death by 1,000 screens doesn't do it for me, and that's kind of what Oregon is at the moment. And Washington State can bomb it on you. They have really good receivers. I think their offensive line is actually pretty solid. Can they run the ball all that effectively or efficiently or explosively? Maybe not, but I don't know that matters when you have the passing attack that they have and a pretty good athlete at quarterback in Cameron Ward. So I'll take the Cougs.
So I'll take Oregon then. I'll take Oregon's offense 8. And I will say I had Oregon's offense ahead of Washington State's offense on this. It's close. Oregon's averaging 51.6 points per game. That's second in the nation to USC. Washington State's averaging 45.8 points per game. That's fifth in the Power 5. Oregon's also second in the nation in yards per game behind Washington. And Oregon's only committed 1 turnover in 345 plays. So why I also wrote down death by 1,000 cuts. You called it death by 1,000 screens. So here's the difference. If we're having like a Heisman best player conversation, then Oregon's offensive style affects my view of Bo Nix compared to Cam Ward and Michael Penix and JJ McCarthy and the best quarterbacks in the North. If we're just talking about getting after you as a team, and you throw in Troy Franklin as a receiver and Bucky Irving as a running back and a pretty good offensive line, they're good at what they do. It is 1,000 cuts, but it is a swarm. Like, it's on you. It's completely opposite of what Washington does. And I feel like Washington State's maybe like in between. Washington's all 4 verts, bomb, bomb, bomb. Oregon is everything short, and Washington State maybe mixes it up a little bit. So stylistically, give me Washington. Stylistically, give me Washington State. Effectiveness, I got to give the nod to Oregon because I do think they're going to be a problem for people, that they don't turn it over and they do have explosive playmakers. I think this may continue to work, man. And by the way, it's not this week, but it's the next week. Oregon, Washington. A week from now, it's all we're going to be talking about on this show because it's going to be such a great game, but such a contrast in styles offensively. But I think you've got to give a nod to how good Oregon is at what they choose to do.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And they've kind of ramped it up too. Like how impressed you want us to be for putting up 80 on Portland State. It's like, well, we'll put up a boatload of points on Colorado and Stanford too. So it's good to see them do that against teams that have a little bit of a pulse, even though those teams defensively probably aren't that good either. All right. My next pick.
Yep.
I think I'm gonna take the Iowa defense.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah.
Doing the thing that I could not allow myself to do, even though they got some dudes in Iowa. Okay. Make the case.
First of all, no defenses or few defenses, I should say, are on the field as much as Iowa's defense is. Iowa's offense is 127th, I think, in the country, or 122nd maybe in time of possession. They do not hold on to the ball. The defense is out there for the entire game. Go watch the Penn State game and how much that defense is on the field. And I thought they played pretty well for the entirety of that game. They still operate like mostly a top 10 defense. And part of it is who they play, right? I think their numbers historically do get boosted from playing in the Big Ten West. They're not really the benefactor of that yet, and they're still playing like a top 10 defense when you look at most of the metrics, and they're doing so with an offense that gives them absolutely no help. So maybe they're not a top 10 unit in the North. Maybe I'm overreaching here a little bit, but I want to give a tip of the cap, a nod to Phil Parker and what they do in Iowa City on defense, because we make fun of their offense so much, and deservedly so. That defense is excellent, like most years. And what's happening to like Utah right now, where like they're getting overlooked because their offense is not very good. Like that happens to Iowa every year. I feel bad for them.
I'll buy it. And it's historically too, right? I mean, this is not a Johnny come lately kind of situation. This is what they do, and they are winning games. Right? As oddly and weirdly as they are doing it, they are winning games, and it is obviously fueled by the defense and the special teams. So that will leave the 10th pick to me, and I'm going to take a unit that I did have 9th on my list, and I just feel like for what they can be, they need to be picked here, and that's the Ohio State offense.
Yep.
Ohio State last year averaged 7.28 yards per play for the season, and that led the country. This year, Ohio State is averaging 7.1 yards per play, and that's 12th in the Power 5, and it's 6th in the North. So again, the stats are high right now because of non-conference play. We're going to get into conference play. Everything's going to slow down a little bit, get a little more difficult. The offensive stat numbers will come down. But Washington, Oregon, Louisville, Notre Dame, and Washington State are all averaging more yards per play than Ohio State right now. But I'm still taking Ohio State here above offenses like Notre Dame. Actually, Louisville's not in the North. Like, don't try to climb up in here, Louisville. You got to cross them out. Maybe you want to come up. You want to come over and play Louisville? Maybe. Come on, Jeff Brom. If you beat Notre Dame, we might take you. 5th in the North because Louisville's in the South. This is the number I don't like. Red zone touchdown percentage for Ohio State. They've scored 7 touchdowns on 13 red zone trips. That's 53.9 red zone touchdown percentage. That's 95th in the country.
Yeah. That
is not good. Last year, they were 74.6 red zone touchdown percentage. That was 6th in the country. You know who they miss in the red zone? You know who's good in the red zone? Braxton Miller. 2012, 2013, Ohio State, 81%, 84% red zone touchdown rate, 2nd in the nation, 1st in the nation, because you got the Braxton Miller and he just danced around people inside the 10 and was like, I'm going to get in the end zone one way or the other here. This is an actual issue for them, which is why I was so impressed that Washington's red zone touchdown percentage is pretty high. It's a small sample size, 7 out of 13, but we saw it show up when it mattered in the Notre Dame game, and they've got to get this figured out. It's why I don't think they can be any higher than this. And I think maybe you could make a case for some other units here that Ohio State doesn't make the top 10 because they're potentially explosive. They're not all the way there yet, but they've also got to find a way to score when it gets tight and when it matters. And if not, it's going to lose them a game.
Yeah, I mean, that's been an issue in probably 3 of Ryan Day's 5 seasons as a head coach is drive finishing. Everything else looks great. You got to punch it in the end zone when you get inside the 10 or inside the 20. And their plan there is like I don't know what happened. Like, I don't know how they stopped figuring out how to score touchdowns in the red zone, and they did it last year because they had like CJ Stroud was really good throwing the ball down in the red zone. And they had Mayan Williams to punctuate drives, and they're not really using him right now. So they have an ability to do it. They just, I think, get in their own head sometimes. We've seen, you mentioned the Washington play, like we've seen plenty teams who are creative down there, and you have to be, I think, to score touchdowns. If you're not just going to line up and push teams off the line of scrimmage, which I think Ohio State is not really built to do. So they got to find that footing. But I also would, I'm a little bullish on like where they're going offensively. I think perhaps they are starting to figure some things out. So I think they deserve to be on this list. I would have taken them 10th as well. Like I would not have let this go by without taking them because I don't know who else you're talking about. Like I'm not taking Oregon State's offense over theirs. I'm not taking Notre Dame's offense or probably not Notre Dame's defense over there. So I actually think it's kind of cut and dry, and a lot of it is ceiling more so than production to date. But I'm fine with that because I think their ceiling is still really high.
You mentioned Ryan Day's career at Ohio State. 2019, 78.7% red zone touchdown percentage. That was 4th in the nation. So that's good. 2020, 63.6. That was 57th in the nation. Not good. 2021, 64.4%, 45th in the nation. Not good. Last year, 74.6, 6th in the nation. Good. Now 53.9. So the 3rd year out of 5, which is exactly what you said, that they've had an issue with this. So they do have to figure it out. I had Oregon State's offense 10th on my list. I didn't have Iowa in the top 10. Did we hit your top 10 exactly?
We did. Yeah.
Look at you. Look at us. Look at us. So, yeah, I mean, I think Notre Dame, just like, they have some ability on both sides of the ball. They've played some squeakers where if maybe either side of the ball was a little bit better, they would have won the Ohio State game. So in the mix, but not quite there. And I do think it is kind of cut and dry. And probably if Ohio State wants to get where they want to go, the Ohio State offense has to move up this list by the end of the year. But I do think when we're talking about team rankings, a lot of what we're talking about is Washington and Penn State have the best individual units. You and I agreed on that without a doubt. And then we put Michigan both sides of the ball 3rd and 4th. So when we're having these conversations, it's Washington and Penn State are awesome at one thing. How good are they at the other? And Michigan is really good at both. And I think that's where we've been pretty consistently much of the year.
Yep, and I think that's where you want to be. It's hard to win a national championship when you're deficient on one side of the ball, and I don't know that Washington and Penn State are. I think we need to see more from Washington's defense and Penn State's offense. But yeah, like Michigan's got it humming pretty good on both sides of the ball right now.
All right. We talked about Iowa's defense. When we come back, it's time to talk about Iowa's offense, like we do every week on the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show. Time once again for a weekly segment, the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show. And once again, it's not fun because the bad karma of this ridiculous idea of putting a point total on an offensive coordinator. Luke Lachey, their great tight end, was injured a couple weeks ago. Now Cade McNamara, their starting quarterback, was hurt in this last game against Michigan State. Kirk Ferentz after the game was saying, like, it doesn't seem good. You could hear Cade McNamara after the game talking to a Michigan State player saying, I messed up my knee. He'd been dealing with a quad injury. Deacon Hill, the backup quarterback, comes in. And it was interesting because like last week, Landis, we do this show early in the week, and then Iowa people are talking during the week last week, and Cade McNamara is kind of saying stuff like, I don't know, man, like, I don't call the plays. So I think that like there'd been some frustration a little bit with him as the quarterback, but you hate to see a guy like that get hurt. They're on to Deacon Hill, who's a 258-pound quarterback. He had verbally committed to Wisconsin in May of 2019, which is forever ago. That was Paul Christ and Joe Rudolph that he committed to. He's from California. He's a giant Wisconsin quarterback. He's there, and now he transfers to Iowa, and now it feels like it's going to be on him the rest of the year. But I don't know if people believe in karma or not, but you just set yourself up for stuff like this, and it's just another really unfortunate thing to have injuries to maybe the two most important players for this Iowa offense.
It stinks, right? I think you want good things for like a player like Cade McNamara, is like changing scenery and like trying to help elevate an Iowa offense that has been in the dumpster for so many years. And just wasn't really put in position to do that. And like Luke Lachey, I think is an excellent tight end who now can't do his part to help that offense. So like you wish them like speedy recoveries, want good things for them. The thing that I am now a little worried about, I guess, in a world where like Iowa very clearly needs to get rid of Brian Ferentz and like set this number to get there, and now they're not going to get there because they're missing Cade McNamara and Luke Lachey. Are they going to be able to use these injuries as a way to skirt around not getting there?
Hadn't thought of that. Now, well, Brian didn't have his guys. Is this not fun anymore? Should we kill this segment? Is it not fun? It's just frustrating.
It's becoming
and
less
angering.
Fun, yeah.
They beat Michigan State 26-16. It's a game Michigan State probably could have won, but Cooper DeJean gets a punt return touchdown. Great play by him at the end of the game to win that game for Iowa. They're outgained 349-222. Deacon Hill, as the backup quarterback, comes in and is 11 of 27 for 115 yards. Iowa kicks 4 field goals in the game. Here are their drives for the final 3 field goals. 4 plays, -5 yards. 7 plays, 20 yards. 6 plays, 14 yards. All scoring drives for Brian Ferentz. 7 punts, 4 field goals, 2 turnovers, and a touchdown. That's what the offense did. It's terrible. But the excuses are piling up. They should not have beaten Michigan State. Their schedule, the Big Ten West, is such a mess. They don't play anybody good the rest of the year. On the they've already lost to Penn State. They don't play Michigan or Ohio State. The idea that we've got to give Brian another chance. I did like a little joke on Twitter where they released the Iowa injury report. And it was out and questionable was none. So I whited out the none, and I typed into questionable offensive play calling, hiring practices, and nepotism guidelines as questionable, like on the actual report. And I almost like matched the font and the size of the font. It looked pretty realistic. It was like one of those things, if you just saw it run past your feed on Twitter, you might have just been like, I don't care about the Iowa injury report. But there was a joke in there. And it didn't get any traction because I think people are sick of it. I think they're sick of me taking shots at Iowa, and it's not fun. And that was before Cade McNamara got hurt. But I actually wonder if this big giant, 258, 6'3", 258, you got to watch this guy play quarterback. there's something in there to him. He's like an interesting prospect, right?
Yeah.
He's got to figure it out. I almost wonder if they're going to like Josh Allen this thing. And all of a sudden, like we're 2 years away from people being like, I don't know. I can see Deacon Hill in the back half of the first round. Maybe Brian Ferentz stumbles into that. I don't know, man.
No, that would require him being creative. So
he is the quarterback's coach.
I don't think
he's
we have
also
to worry
the quarterback's coach in all of this. We can't forget that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but it was just, again, like just bad offense, right? These are field goal drive on their opening drive, 3 plays, 3 yards punt, 3 plays, 3 yards punt, 3 plays, 6 yards punt of their next 3 drives. Then it's 5 plays, 80 yards for a touchdown, 3 plays, 5 yards punt, fumble, interception, field goal, 3 plays, 5 yards punt, 3 plays, 0 yards punt. I mean, it's just when they're bad, like they can't even get a first down, right? I wonder, do they have 3 and out stats? Can we look up how many 3 and they have to be up there in the national lead in 3 and outs, right?
That would be like offensive first down rate. I think it's probably the best way to look at that. What percentage of your offensive drives get at least 1 first down? And again, these are not updated from
them being bad at it.
Yeah, but they came into the week ranked 110th in the country with only 57% of their drives getting at least 1 first down, which is frankly higher than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I think that might have gone down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 3 and outs, and a 4 and out on 14 drives. So anyway, I mean, it's just terrible. But now we've entered the world of making excuses for Brian Ferentz, which it's going to be the end of me. So it's turning me into a worse person than I was before this whole episode. Not saying I was a good person, but it's making me a worse person.
Iowa in that game against Michigan State rushed for fewer yards and a worse average than Richmond did against Michigan State in week 2.
That'd be a nice landing spot for Brian.
Richmond?
FCS head coach. He can make it. It's one of those things. Like he decided to go take on that challenge of being a head coach.
Time for him to run his own program.
Yeah. That's what everybody knows. That's the real answer to this. Maybe it'll be in the South. Send him to the South. Can we trade Brian Ferentz for Missouri? Let's make that swap.
I make that deal. Yeah, that's a no-brainer for me.
All right. When we come back, it is time to look ahead. Best games in Northern football. Next after this on Kings of the North. All right, Landis, I put 6 games on our list for the look ahead. There's some decent games. Like I didn't put Syracuse, North Carolina on the list just because I already said, like, I'm kind of disappointed in Syracuse. Like, it's fine. Good luck against North Carolina. But I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about that again because they weren't ready. So let's talk about Ohio State, Maryland. Ohio State, Maryland. It's at Ohio State. Ohio State's favored by 18.5. It's a noon kick on Fox. Ohio State leads the series 8-0. The average score of games in the Ohio State-Michigan series is 57-23. Maryland does not stop Ohio State at all. Maryland is 5-0, and it's not the first time that Maryland's looked decent heading into an Ohio State game. In 2021, Maryland was 4-1 coming into this game. In 2017, Maryland was 3-1. In 2014, Maryland was 4-1. 2 years ago, when they were 4-1 coming in, Ohio State won by 49. So it's kind of like, are we supposed to think this could be a game? Could it be?
I don't think so. The line movement has been a little interesting. It was 3 touchdowns and now it's like 18 points, I think. I talked about this on the podcast daily with Austin on Monday. When these games have gotten weird, it has been late in the season at Maryland when I think Ohio State is just looking at past Maryland at something bigger. More often than not, it's the Michigan game. That is not at play here. Ohio State is coming off a week off. I don't think Maryland is in a position to like surprise them or take advantage of like sleepy Ohio State. So I don't think this is a particularly good or interesting game. I suppose for Ohio State's secondary, it's a decent test with Talia Tagovailoa, and Maryland usually has good skill. I don't think it's as good as it has been, but it's still pretty good. So that could be interesting to watch, but I don't know that I see Maryland keeping this particularly close.
It's not exactly fair, but when you're trying to gauge like how real Maryland is, it's natural, I think, to compare them to Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State in the Big Ten East. Talia's 1-6 against those teams. The wins against Penn State in the COVID year, and that was a big win for the Maryland program that season. He has 10 touchdowns and 6 interceptions in those games, averages 241 passing yards a game. It just feels like a stretch, and that Maryland may go on to have like a very nice 9-win season. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like this is going to be the moment for them. They have turned it around a little bit against Charlotte and Virginia early in the year. They trailed both those games 14-0. Now they're getting it going. They jumped out 21-0 on Michigan State, and they took it to Indiana from the jump. They were up 37-3 before they put that thing away. So like they are the slow, like they can't start slow. If they start slow, they're going to lose by 50. If they start fast, like they had the last couple weeks, it could be interesting for a half. I think that's on the board and on the table, but I still do think like an Ohio State cover wearing Maryland down in the third and fourth quarter. We know how those kind of Ohio State games look. Feels like the most likely outcome.
Yeah. I mean, I don't recall the script of the Michigan State game, but they started fast against Indiana because Indiana gave them the ball twice in the red zone, basically.
All right, let's go to a Peacock special. Rutgers at Wisconsin, noon on Peacock. Wisconsin at home, favored by 13. Wisconsin is 4-0 all-time against Rutgers. Average score in those games is 42-8. Rutgers is 4-1. Their loss is 31-7 to Michigan, where they competed like for a drive early on, and everybody was like, oh, and then Michigan just put them away. It's a nice 4-1 start for Rutgers. Their defense is not one of the top 10 units in the North. It's probably one of the top 20 units in the North.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a question of, can this Rutgers defense do something with this Wisconsin offense that you've had some questions about? Do you think this could be a game?
I do think it could be a game. I actually think this ends up being pretty close. I don't know. I still don't think I believe in Rutgers offense to get enough points to win a game like this, but I think their defense is stingy enough and like annoying enough to keep it closer perhaps than it should be. I still don't really believe whatsoever in Wisconsin's ability to throw the ball effectively or explosively or in any way that resembles being dangerous. But I also can see them just like giving the ball to Braylon Allen 30 times in this game and seeing what he can do with it. And maybe that's enough. Rutgers rush defense has been pretty good. And they limit explosive plays. Like it's actually a solid defense, which is not surprising under Greg Schiano. So I think it's close. I would still pick Wisconsin to win, but even the fact that I'm like a little wishy-washy about that notion, I think tells you what kind of season Rutgers has had so far.
All right, third game is Michigan at Minnesota. It's a 7:30 start on NBC. Michigan on the road is favored by 19.5. Michigan leads the all-time series with Minnesota 76-25-3. They've won 3 straight. Minnesota did win in Ann Arbor, I guess in I don't know what year that was, 2014. You have to talk about Michigan when they play bad teams. Otherwise, you don't talk about Michigan. Michigan's 5-0, and it's Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan State, Purdue. And we can't just sit and wait for the Michigan-Penn State game on November 11th all year. So the result is we're talking about, hey, Michigan and Minnesota, what do you think? Minnesota's 2-3. They had the overtime win at Nebraska in the opener. They lost to North Carolina and Northwestern, and they're coming off a win over Louisiana. I don't know. They play for a jug. I saw a tweet that they're out of room on the jug. There's no more rooms for the scores on the little brown jug. So I guess maybe that's the story of the game.
Yeah, I think this is a squash. Minnesota's offense is bad. Minnesota typically has a pretty good defense, and Joe Rossi, the defensive coordinator, I actually think is one of the more underrated coordinators, certainly in the North, but perhaps in the country. He's fielded pretty good defenses most years. They are not particularly good this year, so I don't really see a way where this is close. I think Michigan keeps rolling, and I guess if you're looking for things from Michigan, like you want to see that run game continue to round in the form.
All right, another 7:30 game. It's Notre Dame at Louisville, 7:30 on ABC. Notre Dame on the road is favored by 6.5. Again, as we said, this is a run of 4 straight night games, the third of 4 for Notre Dame. Louisville is one of 17 Power 5 undefeateds in the country, so that's good for them. Their wins include a 5-pointer over Georgia Tech, a 7-point win over Indiana, a 3-point win last week over North Carolina State. So I don't know. Their quarterback, Jack Plummer's thrown 6 picks. I don't know if it's a chance to jump up and surprise Notre Dame. It's like at home for Louisville, USC next week. We've talked about what Notre Dame just went through. Can Louisville seize the moment here? This would be a gigantic win for year one of Jeff Brom if they get it done.
Yeah, I mean, it's at Louisville, right?
Yep.
I guess I can see it. I'm sure that place will be jumping. Indiana, I thought, showed in the second half that you can slow down Louisville's offense a little bit. Now, that has not really happened since then, but I think they're not. I don't know if the numbers are totally telling us the truth about how good Louisville's offense is. I think they're probably a notch below that. I do think Notre Dame's defense is pretty good. I don't know what we're going to get out of Notre Dame's offense. Is Notre Dame going to be able to just like run it down their throat for the entirety of the game? Perhaps. They're shorthanded at receiver. They're missing some guys against Duke. They're just not good, really, or dangerous throwing the ball to those receivers. So I don't know if Notre Dame puts up a big number in this game, but I think it's possible that Notre Dame's defense just kind of sits on Louisville and wins like a pretty low scoring and perhaps tight-ish kind of game.
All right, and the last two are a Pac-12 two-pack. They're both on the Pac-12 network. Washington State at UCLA at 3 o'clock and Oregon State at Cal at 10 o'clock. Washington State is actually an underdog. Washington State's ranked in the top 15 in the country. They're an underdog at UCLA. UCLA is favored by 3.5. Oregon State is a road favorite at Cal. Oregon State favored by 9.5. Cal only lost to Auburn 14-10. That was the team I was like, Auburn hasn't done anything. They barely beat Cal. And then Cal lost by 27 to Washington. So I don't know about Cal hanging with Oregon State. UCLA 14-7 loss to Utah, but that was like Utah putting Dante Moore, the UCLA freshman quarterback, in a spin cycle that whole game.
Yeah.
I don't know that UCLA can score consistently with Washington State. What do we make of that line? That yeah, it's on the road, but Washington State is not Washington State a somewhat substantially better team than UCLA?
Yeah, I don't know. I think UCLA is probably better than people want to believe if they were just basing it off the Utah game. You get the freshman quarterback now back at home, more comfortable. I don't think Washington State's going to get after him nearly as much as Utah did. Washington State's secondary, I think, has some playmakers back there. They're pretty good at making disruptive plays, getting interceptions. So I don't think it's going to be an easy day for UCLA, but probably certainly easier than it was against Utah. That is weird. Like I would think that Washington State is more than capable of holding its own against UCLA. I guess it's like you get 3 points because if you're on the road or you're at home if you're UCLA, so it's more viewed as like a pick 'em. Yeah, I like Washington State there, but it's not the same test that UCLA faced when they faced Utah. I think it is substantially different.
And this is just, again, Oregon State just has to win games like this against Cal to stay on track, to give themselves a chance when they get to Oregon and Washington later in the year. And I do expect Oregon State will do that. That was a really good win over Utah. And I do think there's Oregon State's got a little Michigan in them, I think. And so just like grind it out and control the ball and don't make mistakes, and they should be able to take care of business. So it's not a great slate. I do think Maryland, Ohio State might be the most interesting because we're going to get a read, I think, on that Ohio State defense that we ranked pretty high in the North, because it's one of these things that can be difficult. It's like, hey, Maryland's good. And then Maryland doesn't play well against Ohio State. It's like, Maryland's not very good. It's like, no, I actually do think offensively, Maryland with Mike Locksley and Talia Tagovailoa feel like they've been together forever at Maryland. Now, I do think they're good. I think they have a good plan. They have some playmakers. Tagovailoa is not afraid. He's been in a lot of games like this compared to a lot of other quarterbacks who come into Ohio Stadium and shrink. I don't think he'll do that. So if the Ohio State defense plays well on Saturday, I think it's like another notch on their belt because Maryland has moved the ball on a lot of the teams they've played.
They have, and it's another good gauge of where exactly is Ohio State and its ability to get after quarterbacks, because Maryland's offensive line actually isn't terrible, and they're pretty good pass blocking offensive line. They made a switch at right tackle like 2 games ago, but it does seem like it's paid off for them. But their left tackle, Delmar Glaze, is like we don't talk about him. He is among the best tackles in college football, I think, at least from a pass blocking perspective. He's a pretty good player. Like, he's an NFL guy for sure. So watching like JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer or whoever else might play end go against him, I think could be pretty good matchup watching. And yeah, it'll be, if they can't get out after Talia and like Talia is comfortable, then I think Maryland can make this closer. So and Ohio State, I think some people were left wanting more from how they got after Sam Hartman in that game against Notre Dame. So this is an opportunity to kind of right that and get a little better.
All right, that'll do it for Kings of the North this week. We do it early in the week, every week, to wrap up the best of Northern football and look ahead to what's coming in Northern football. And again, like, man, a week from now, you got to be here, because the Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan trifecta, those 3 games against each other are all going to be huge games. But other than that, and maybe even better than that, Oregon, Washington is going to be as good as it gets. So a week from now, we'll be previewing that and getting a sense of what's going to be a huge game in the Pac-12 race and in the national title race. And by the way, they're both coming to the Big Ten next year. So like, if you're watching this show, you care about Oregon, Washington, because they're not going away. And that's something I'm going to want to talk about next week, because Bo Nix isn't going to be around next year at Oregon, and Michael Penix isn't going to be around next year at Washington. And are these things that are fueled only by veteran transfer quarterbacks that these 2 programs happen to hit upon? Or are these programs that put those quarterbacks in positions to succeed in a way they didn't succeed at their previous stops? And all the credit to the quarterbacks, but Oregon and Washington are going to keep doing this. Like, that's the conversation I think we have a week from now. It's because it's not just about what they are now. It's about what they're going to be in the new world when they join the Big Ten. I think that's really interesting. For now, we appreciate you guys making us part of your week. For Bill Landis, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.